Ever wonder what happens when a black student with a genius IQ faces constant humiliation just because of her skin color? In today's Black Voice Dramatic Stories, you'll witness Naomi Lawrence's fight to prove that brilliance knows no boundaries. But will her courage, her photographic memory, be enough to take down a prejudiced professor? Let's dive into her incredible journey. Don't forget to hit subscribe, like, and comment if you want more inspiring stories like this. Naomi Lawrence sat in the back of her biochemistry lecture hall, a silent observer of the chaos unfolding around her. She wasn't a troublemaker, never had been. But somehow, every time Dr. Victor Hammond, her professor, opened his mouth, she could feel the weight of his judgment thick and suffocating. It wasn't just his condescending tone that grated on her nerves. No, it was the subtle glances, the quiet scoffs that only she seemed to catch. Being black at Westridge University meant carrying a heavy burden of being underestimated. But Naomi wasn't just any student. She was the one with the genius IQ, the photographic memory that allowed her to not only understand complex concepts, but to recall them down to the most minute detail. She had tried to let it slide. The subtle whispers, the glances, even the unspoken doubts that hung in the air whenever she entered a room. But today something in Hammond's demeanor made her feel a twinge of rage. "Miss Lawrence," Dr. Hammond's voice sliced through the air like a razor, "I have a question for you." Her classmates tensed, sensing the brewing storm. Naomi's pulse quickened, but she kept her composure. She knew this was coming. He had been gunning for her for weeks now, undermining her at every opportunity. The questions were always the same, difficult, designed to make her stumble. But Naomi didn't falter. Not this time. "Explain the molecular mechanism of CRISPR-Cas9, Hammond continued, his eyes narrowing as if to scrutinize every word that left her mouth. "Let's see if you can handle something more than your memorization." Naomi's grip tightened on her pencil, but her voice remained steady. "CRISPR-Cas9 is a tool used for gene editing that works by using an enzyme called Cas9 to cut DNA at a specific location. Once the DNA is cut, the cell's repair machinery can be used to add or delete pieces of genetic material. The system is guided by a piece of RNA, known as guide RNA, which directs Cas9 to the right part of the DNA strand." There was a moment of silence, the room hanging on her every word. Hammond, visibly flustered, tried to recover, but Naomi wasn't done. She leaned forward, her eyes meeting his. "This technology has transformed genetic research," Naomi continued, "allowing scientists to treat genetic disorders, potentially eliminate diseases like sickle cell anemia, and even modify the genes of human embryos. But of course, there are ethical concerns, such as the potential for unintended consequences and the question of whether we should be altering the human genome at all." Hammond's lips pressed into a thin line, but Naomi's words had struck a nerve. "Impressive," Hammond muttered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But let's see if you can handle something more nuanced." The room grew colder. Naomi knew exactly where this was headed. Hammond had a habit of making these nuanced questions impossible to answer, especially when he could manipulate them to expose her, to paint her as merely a student who relied on rote memorization rather than actual understanding. "You remember the Wong et al. Article from last month?" Hammond asked, his eyes glittering with a cruel edge. "The one on gene editing in human embryos? It wasn't even part of the syllabus, but surely you remember it. Tell me, Naomi, what are the ethical implications?" Naomi felt the heat rise in her chest. The article had only been briefly mentioned weeks ago, an afterthought in the lecture, but she had memorized it. Every page, every word. The image of the article burned in her mind. She took a deep breath and stood up. The ethical concerns highlighted in the article focus on informed consent, the inequality of access to such technologies, and the broader question of whether we should be allowed to modify the human germline for non-therapeutic purposes. Naomi began, her voice steady and powerful. "Wong suggests that such decisions could potentially lead to a future where only the wealthy have access to genetic enhancements, further deepening social inequality." The room was silent again. Hammond's jaw clenched. Naomi wasn't done yet. Further, she continued, "Garcia and Patel's studies complement Wong's argument. particularly round the idea of non-therapeutic genetic modifications. These modifications could set dangerous precedents for the future, where genetic traits could be altered to enhance intelligence, physical abilities, or even appearance, creating an entire generation of genetically perfect individuals. The ethical line becomes increasingly blurred. Hammond stood there, momentarily speechless, his face flushed with frustration. Naomi had taken his trap and turned it into a masterclass of ethical reasoning. But Hammond wasn't one to back down so easily. He leaned in, his tone sharp, as if trying to catch her off guard. "Impressive, Miss Lawrence," he said slowly, "but let's see how you handle something a little more complex." He paused, letting the tension build in the room. A small remote community has a rare genetic disease. There are children who could be saved through an experimental treatment. But the ethical dilemma is this: can we, as scientists, perform experiments on children who don't fully understand the risks? Use Harrington's model of scientific responsibility to justify your answer. Naomi's heart raced, but her face remained a mask of calm. Hammond was trying to push her into a corner, to trap her with his moral labyrinth. But Naomi had seen this game before. She took a deep breath and met his gaze. "The question you've posed is a false dichotomy," Naomi replied. "Harrington's model suggests 3 key principles for ethical responsibility. First, education, making sure the community fully understands the risks. Second, developing a council made up of community representatives to oversee the decision. And third, gradual implementation, with constant monitoring of results and a commitment to halting the experiment if it's causing harm." She paused, then continued, quoting Harrington directly. As Harrington himself states on page 134, "Ethical responsibility cannot be determined in isolation. It must be a collaborative effort with the community, ensuring that the principle of do no harm remains paramount." The entire class was on edge, watching the confrontation unfold. Hammond's face was a mask of anger and disbelief. But Naomi wasn't finished. She had him. "You see, Dr. Hammond," she said calmly, "the problem with your question is that it assumes a binary choice. You're not giving these people a voice. You're not offering them a chance to make an informed decision. That's what Harrington's model is about, ensuring that people, even those with limited understanding, have a stake in their own future." Hammond's eyes narrowed, but Naomi had already won. She had turned his trap into a lesson on ethics and power. And as she sat down, she could feel the shift in the room. For the first time, some of her classmates were looking at her with admiration, and even Dr. Eliza Chun, a medical ethics professor who had been observing the class, raised an eyebrow in approval. But Hammond wasn't done, not yet. As the class ended, he asked Naomi to stay behind. Naomi's heart raced. She saw the storm brewing in his eyes, but she was ready. Zoe had been watching Naomi from the back of the lecture hall, her eyes flicking between Naomi and Dr. Hammond as the confrontation escalated. She had always admired Naomi from a distance. Her intelligence, her confidence, the way she always seemed to rise above the noise of prejudice. But today, Zoe was seeing something different. Naomi wasn't just answering questions. She was dismantling Hammond's arrogance piece by piece, and Zoe could feel the weight of every word she spoke. Naomi was more than just a student. She was a force. Zoe knew that most people, including the faculty, underestimated Naomi. They saw her as a token, someone who had only been admitted because of diversity quotas. Zoe had heard the whispers, the offhand comments, the way people treated Naomi differently. She had never truly understood the depth of that discrimination until now, until she saw Naomi calmly face down a professor who had made it his mission to belittle her at every turn. It wasn't just about the questions. It was about the way Hammond had deliberately set her up, time and time again, to fail. Zoe could see that clearly now. She wasn't sure how Naomi had managed to keep her cool, how she had maintained that impenetrable calm. It was as if she was built to handle this kind of attack. But it was more than that. Naomi was fearless in a way Zoe had never been. And for the first time, Zoe began to wonder if she could be that brave too. After class, Zoe couldn't shake the image of Hammond's face, flushed with frustration and barely contained rage. It had been a spectacle, but it was also deeply unsettling. This wasn't just about Naomi's academic prowess, it was about something far darker, something that Zoe was only beginning to comprehend. Hammond wasn't just trying to undermine Naomi's intellectual capabilities. He was trying to destroy her, to make her doubt herself, to prove that someone like her didn't belong. In this space, Zoe couldn't stand it anymore. She had watched Naomi endure this for weeks, maybe even months, and it was time to do something about it. She wasn't naive. She knew how the system worked. She had seen it firsthand. There were always whispers about the quota students, the ones who were only there because of their background, their race, and it was clear to Zoe that Naomi was one of those students, at least in the eyes of people like Hammond. But Zoe also knew that Naomi was different. She was exceptional, and it was time for someone to help her. Prove it. That's when Zoe made up her mind. She had to act. She had to be a part of this fight. The next morning, Zoe found Naomi sitting alone in the library, surrounded by stacks of books. Her focus was unshakable. As always, it was one of the things Zoe admired most about her. Naomi didn't let anything distract her, and right now, Naomi was deep in the weeds, preparing for whatever challenge Hammond would throw at her next. Zoe hesitated for a moment before walking over. "Naomi," Zoe said quietly, her voice betraying the weight of her thoughts. Naomi looked up, her expression softening when she saw Zoe. "Hey," Naomi replied, her tone warm but tired. "What's up?" Zoe sat down across from her, the weight of her words hanging in the air. "I saw what happened in class today. You were amazing. But I know it's not just about the questions, right? It's about him, Hammond. He's been trying to break you down. And I don't know about you, but I'm done just watching." Naomi looked at Zoe for a long moment, her eyes unreadable. "I'm not going to let him win," Naomi said finally, her voice steady. "He's just one person, and I'm not going to let his ignorance define me." Zoe nodded slowly, understanding the resolve in Naomi's voice, but she also saw the toll it was taking on her friend. Naomi was strong, but she was human too, and Zoe could see the weight of every battle Naomi fought, the quiet toll it took on her soul. "Listen," Zoe began, her voice a little shaky now. "I know it's not easy, but I want to help. I can't sit back anymore and pretend that everything's fine. We need to expose what Hammond's been doing. We need to show everyone what he really is." Naomi didn't respond immediately, but Zoe could see the flicker of something in her eyes. Naomi wasn't sure. She didn't want to make it bigger than it had to be. But Zoe knew deep down that Naomi understood the same thing Zoe was starting to realize. This wasn't just about her. It was about something much bigger, about standing up against a system that was built to silence people like Naomi. "Okay," Naomi said after a long silence, "we'll do it together. But we do this smart. We have to gather everything, every detail, every instance. I won't just be the one to bring this to light. It'll be on our terms, not his." Zoe smiled, relieved. "You're not alone in this, Naomi. We'll take him down one piece at a time." And just like that, something shifted between them. Naomi, the quiet genius, and Zoe, the determined ally, had found their rhythm. They would fight this fight together, not just for Naomi's future, but for every student who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, or silenced. They weren't going to let the system break them. But the war wasn't over. Hammond still had his power, and Zoe knew that things were about to get even more intense. The path ahead would be filled with danger. But for the first time, she felt a spark of hope. Naomi wasn't just going to survive this fight. She was going to make sure that Hammond, and everyone like him, would never have the power to hurt anyone again. Zoe's resolve was solid. She wasn't going to sit on the sidelines anymore. She was in this heart and soul. The real fight was just beginning. Naomi's heart pounded as she stepped into the crowded auditorium. The seats filled with students and faculty, all gathered for Hammond's open master class. The air was thick with anticipation, but Naomi could sense the tension twisting in her gut. Today wasn't just another class. This was at the moment that would either crush her spirit or set her free. Zoe was already sitting in the front row, giving her a reassuring nod as she adjusted the recorder in her bag. They had spent the last week meticulously preparing for this moment. Naomi had combed through every one of Hammond's published works, piecing together contradictions, ethical loopholes, and disturbing biases. She knew every argument, every claim he'd made. She was ready, but a part of her still hesitated. It wasn't just about the fight against Hammond, it was about what would happen afterward. Exposing him would shake the foundation of everything she'd worked for. There was no going back after this. Naomi had always been the quiet student, the one who avoided confrontation, the one who played by the rules. But now, she was about to tear those rules down. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. As Hammond took the stage, his usual smug smile plastered on his face, Naomi couldn't help but feel the chill run through her veins. This was the man who had humiliated her in front of the entire class, who had undermined her intelligence at every turn. But it wasn't just that he represented everything Naomi had fought against her entire life. The system that told her she didn't belong, that people like her couldn't possibly be as smart, as capable, as worthy. "Good afternoon, everyone," Hammond began, his voice oozing confidence. "Today, I'll be discussing my latest principle of ethical proportionality. It's a breakthrough in bioethics, one that I've developed over decades of research. I'm sure you'll find it fascinating." The room fell silent, every eye on him as he began to outline his theory. Naomi listened carefully, but the words felt hollow, like a facade built to mask the truth. She had read the papers. She knew the truth behind his theory. It was built on contradictions, a compromise of values to suit the interests of corporate sponsors who funded his research. As Hammond continued, Naomi's mind raced. She knew that every second she allowed him to speak unchallenged was another second in which his lies went unexposed. But there was something else gnawing at her, a fear that tightened in her chest. What if Hammond was right? What if the backlash was too much? What if, after all of this, the system didn't change? What if her entire career was destroyed in the process? She glanced at Zoe, who gave her a quick, silent nod. They had prepared for this moment. Zoe was right there with her, but it wasn't enough to silence the doubts running through her mind. Naomi had always been the perfectionist. She had always been the one who followed the rules, who played by the book. What she was about to do wasn't just risky, it was revolutionary. She was about to challenge not just Hammond, but the entire system that had allowed people like him to thrive. The tension built, the room thick with the anticipation of what would come next. Naomi could feel the eyes of everyone on her now. Some were curious, some were skeptical, but most were simply waiting for her to speak. The spotlight was on her. Hammond paused mid-sentence, as if waiting for her to say something. "Miss Lawrence," he said, a smirk creeping across his face, "I'd like to hear your thoughts on my principle. Surely you've read my work." Naomi's breath hitched. This was it. She had to speak now or lose her chance forever. But the fear was overwhelming, threatening to choke her. This wasn't just about the class. This wasn't just about Hammond. This was about everything: her identity, her place in the world, her right to be seen as equal. She opened her mouth, but for a moment, nothing came out. The room seemed to spin, and she could feel the weight of the eyes on her, the weight of the entire institution bearing down. But then, something inside her snapped. She couldn't back down now. Not after everything. "Actually, Dr. Hammond," Naomi said, her voice cutting through the silence, strong and steady, "I've read your work. In fact, I've read all of it. Every paper, every article. And I think it's time you answer for the contradictions you've spent decades hiding behind." There was a collective gasp in the room. Hammond's face tightened, his eyes narrowing with fury. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice tight with barely contained anger. Naomi took a deep breath, gathering every ounce of strength she had left. "Your principle of ethical proportionality is nothing more than a corporate-approved smokescreen. It's a theory built on the idea that cultural and socioeconomic concerns should take a back seat to scientific progress. You've made it clear that the only thing that matters to you is funding, and you've manipulated your own research to fit that agenda." She could feel the eyes of the room on her now, every single person waiting for her next words. And she continued, her voice rising, "Your ethical principles have always been skewed to benefit the powerful. You've justified experimentation on vulnerable populations, on people who don't have a voice, on those who can't fight back." Hammond's face turned red, his fists clenched at his sides. He took a step forward, his voice shaking with rage. "You don't know what you're talking about, Naomi. You're just a student. You're playing with forces you can't possibly understand." Naomi met his gaze, unflinching. "No, Dr. Hammond, what you don't understand is that I'm not just a student. I'm the one who's going to make sure you answer for everything you've done." The room was electric with tension now, the conflict between Naomi and Hammond. A living, breathing thing. Naomi had made her choice. There was no turning back. The air in the auditorium was electric, charged with the tension of Naomi's challenge. The room had shifted in an instant, from admiration to disbelief. Hammond's face was contorted with rage, his arrogance faltering, as Naomi stood unwavering. Before him, ready to expose the truth. She had crossed a line, but in her heart, she knew there was no turning back now. "You're out of your league," Naomi Hammond spat, his voice laced with venom. "Do you really think anyone is going to believe? You're a student, a nobody." The weight of his words hit Naomi hard, a wave of doubt crashing into her mind. It was true. She was just a student, one among hundreds. What could she possibly do against someone as powerful and established as Hammond? The fear clawed at her, threatening to undo everything she had worked. For was she really willing to risk everything for this fight? Was the truth worth the cost of her academic career? For a split second, Naomi felt her confidence waver. The fear of failure, of being crushed under the weight of Hammond's influence, gripped her chest. Her breath quickened, her palms sweating. But then she remembered why she had started this fight in the first place. It wasn't just for her. It was for every student who had been silenced, for every voice that had been drowned out by the systemic oppression that Hammond represented. Naomi forced herself to breathe, steadying her mind. The choice had already been made. She could walk away, let Hammond keep his power and his position, and let the system continue as it always had. Or she could stand tall, speak the truth, and expose everything. The stakes had never been higher, and the path ahead was uncertain. But in this moment, she realized the only thing she could control was her own courage. She locked eyes with Hammond, her voice steady but filled with undeniable conviction. "I'm not a nobody, Dr. Hammond. I'm Naomi Lawrence, and I won't let you hide behind your lies anymore." The room fell deathly silent, every pair of eyes fixed on Naomi. She could feel the collective breath being held, the anticipation, so thick it was suffocating. Hammond's eyes darkened with fury, but Naomi wasn't done. She wasn't backing down. "You've manipulated the truth for years," Naomi continued, her voice ringing out with power. "You've used your position to crush students like me, to twist research for your own gain. But no more. You've had your time, Dr. Hammond. Now it's mine." The sound of Naomi's words echoed in the room, a declaration of defiance that could not be ignored. Hammond's hands shook with rage, his face a mask of disbelief. "You think you can just ruin my career with your accusations?" he sneered, his voice low and dangerous. "You're nothing. You have no evidence." Naomi didn't flinch. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. The contents were meticulously organized: articles, emails, quotes from Hammond's past work, all pointing to the same damning conclusion. She opened it slowly, letting the weight of her actions sink in. This was the moment that would define her, the moment she either backed down or forced the truth to the surface. "Evidence," Naomi repeated, her lips curling into a cold smile. "I have more than enough. I've compiled everything you've ever done, every contradiction, every biased evaluation, every ethical violation." She slammed the folder onto the desk in front of Hammond. The sound sharp and final cut through the silence like a blade. The room buzzed with tension as Hammond's face went pale. He stared at the folder, his expression flickering between anger and fear. The veil of invulnerability he had built around himself was crumbling. "This is insane," Hammond muttered, more to himself than to Naomi. "You have no idea what you're doing." Naomi stood tall, her heart pounding, but her resolve unshaken. Double quote, "So, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm exposing the truth. I'm showing everyone what you've been hiding. You think you can control this university, control the narrative, but you can't. Not anymore." She turned to face the audience, her voice rising with conviction. "This is bigger than just one professor. This is about all the students who have been dismissed, overlooked, silenced, simply because they didn't fit the mold. This is about breaking the cycle of discrimination that's ingrained in this institution. I won't let it continue. The room was silent, but the energy in the air had shifted. Naomi felt the weight of every person in that room watching her, waiting for her next move. Hammond looked like a man cornered, his arrogance stripped away. The power dynamic had shifted. The students, the faculty, even the observers, everyone was watching. Naomi had taken the first step toward change, and now she had to finish what she had started. Get out of my way, Naomi, Hammond growled, his voice full of venom. This isn't over. Naomi stepped forward, her voice unshaken. So it's over, Dr. Hammond. The truth is out, and you can't take it back. Not anymore. As the room erupted into whispers, Naomi's heart raced, but she didn't look away. The conflict inside her had dissolved. The fear had turned into something else, something fierce, something determined. She had made her choice. She would not be silenced. In that moment, Naomi realized the cost of her decision was high. She was standing on the edge, about to face the consequences of everything she had just done. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She had chosen the truth, and that, she knew, would be the thing that would carry her through the storm. The weeks following the explosive confrontation in the auditorium passed in a blur for Naomi. The fallout from her stand against Hammond was swift and brutal, but it was also exactly what she had hoped for: change. The university's ethics committee launched a full investigation into Hammond's conduct, poring over the evidence Naomi had meticulously compiled. It didn't take long for the truth to come to light: the contradictions, the biased evaluations, the unethical research practices. All of it was there, clear as day. Hammond, once an untouchable figure, was immediately suspended, his privileges revoked, his office cleared out within days. The system that had protected him for so long had finally been shattered, not by an anonymous complaint, but by one student's courage to stand up and speak the truth. Naomi's actions had sparked a chain reaction, one that would ripple through the institution for years to come. But even as Hammond's downfall became inevitable, Naomi felt the weight of what she had done. The victory was bittersweet. She had exposed the deep-rooted biases of a powerful man, but it had come at a cost. The path ahead for Naomi was uncertain. She wasn't sure what the fallout would be for her own career. There would always be whispers about how she had ruined a professor's career, how she had made waves where there had been calm, but Naomi had never been one to seek calm. She sought truth, and the truth, however difficult, had to be spoken. 3 weeks later, Naomi stood before the university board. They had offered her a full scholarship to finish her doctoral studies and an invitation to join Dr. Chun's research team. The gesture was a recognition of Naomi's extraordinary intellect, but it was more than that. It was an acknowledgement of her courage to fight for what was right. Naomi had a chance to change the course of her academic future, to reshape the institution she had been a part of for so long. But she wasn't just thinking about herself anymore. As she sat before the board, a flood of thoughts rushed through her mind. She knew this was only the beginning. There were so many other students who had been marginalized, overlooked, dismissed. They needed a voice. I appreciate this offer, Naomi began, her voice steady but emotional. But my decision to fight wasn't just about me. It was about every student who has been made to feel less than because of their race, their background, their gender. I want to make sure that no one else has to fight this fight alone. And for that, we need systemic change. We need a new way of evaluating students, one that's blind to race, gender, and background. We need a way to ensure that no one is ever made to feel invisible. The room was quiet as Naomi spoke, the weight of her words sinking in. This wasn't just about removing one professor from power. It was about creating an environment where students, regardless of their background, could thrive without fear of discrimination. That Naomi had realized the fight wasn't just for her future. It was for everyone who had come before her, and for those who would come after. The board members looked at each other, then nodded. It was clear Naomi's words had struck a chord. They promised to implement a review process for past evaluations, to ensure no student had been unjustly graded because of their race or background. They also agreed to develop a new, blind evaluation protocol for future students, one that would remove bias from the assessment process. That it was a small, but significant, step toward a more equitable future. Naomi left the meeting feeling a sense of quiet satisfaction. She had won, not just for herself, but for every student who had ever been underestimated. And as she walked across the campus, a sense of pride filled her chest. She had fought for the truth, and she had won. But she knew the fight wasn't over. There would always be more battles to face, more injustices to confront. But Naomi had learned something invaluable along the way. The truth, no matter how hard it is to speak, always has the power to change the world. Life lesson and powerful message. Naomi's journey is a reminder of the power of courage, of standing up for what is right even when the odds are stacked against you. Her fight wasn't just about challenging an individual. It was about challenging a system. When we stand up for the truth, even in the face of fear, we can create ripples of change that echo far beyond our own lives. Naomi's story teaches us that while the cost of fighting injustice may be high, the rewards are immeasurable. It is a call to each of us to challenge the systems that allow discrimination to thrive, and to never underestimate the power of one person who refuses to stay silent. Call to action. If Naomi's story resonated with you, share it. Speak out against the injustices you see, whether big or small. Like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that challenge the status quo and inspire change. Together, we can create a world where truth, justice, and equality are not just ideals, but reality.